momentum and they're afraid of that, or finally they don't want to kind of put their name on anything and put their money where their mouth is. I love that our pollsters at Trafalgar Group are saying, hey, we're going to drop all of our results. We're going to show you. And I'm very interested to see how many pollsters are proven wrong, because it's very fun to get to see people in the legacy media in general proven wrong. It happens quite a bit, and it's kind of fun to get to see. I would like to see some people's, to see some people's heads explode. But keep commenting questions. We want to hear from all of you at home. And if you bring up any more embarrassing videos from my past, we're going to ignore them. So intern Elizabeth, screen those questions out. Don't let them get to us. But Georgia, what do we got here next?
I actually also have a suspicion that it might be because now polls are going to be graded. So now there's going to be a little bit of accountability going forward. Actually, did they already start the grading system? I understand that Trafalgar and Emerson are the only two polls that have achieved an A-. Nobody has an A at this point. But I mean, I don't know if that's going to affect what polls people are willing to reveal.
Yeah, leave it to Georgia, who was a teacher at some point in her past life. Leave it to Georgia to start bringing up grades for people. A little flashback there. But we're going to jump now to the state of Ohio, where our reporter Mairead Elordi is reporting on all the closest races there, one of the most important battleground states in Ohio. Mairead, what do you got for us?
Ohio GOP election night watch party in downtown Columbus. The party has not started yet, but candidates should start to arrive around 7:30 p.m., which is also when the polls close across the state of Ohio. We're expecting J.D. Vance to be in attendance and give remarks here tonight. He's the Republican Senate candidate running against Democratic Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan. As you know, Ohio's Senate race is one of the most closely watched and most important races in the nation, and it will help decide the balance of power in the Senate and whether Democrats are able to hold on to their very slim one-vote majority in the upper chamber. As far as polls go, Ohioans are showing up in person to vote at polling places as we speak. Polls close again at 7:30. And so far, it's looking good for Republicans. J.D. Vance has an 8-point lead over Tim Ryan. He actually expanded his lead significantly in the last few weeks. During the first week of October, he was less than 1 point ahead of Ryan. But after the candidates faced each other in 2 debates, he expanded that lead to about 8 points. And we should note, too, this has been an extremely passionate campaign on both sides. Both candidates have attacked each other. Ryan has attacked Vance, saying he kowtows to former President Trump. And Vance has attacked Ryan, saying that he is hypocritical on border security and taxes, as well as other issues, as Ryan attempts to portray himself as a moderate Democrat. We'll be seeing whether he was successful in that venture tonight. And also, I talked to voters at the Trump rally last night, where former President Trump campaigned for J.D. Vance, and many of them were very excited about what they say is a red wave of GOP wins that they think we're going to see tonight. So we'll be closely watching that.
Well, Ohio definitely a state Republicans are going to have if they're going to get to that magic 51 number. One thing that's interesting about Ohio in that race there was, I thought, kind of a turning point in those debates when Ryan was kind of trying to distance himself from Joe Biden, saying, look, I'm a fighter. I stand up for the people of Ohio no matter what, even if it means standing up to President Biden. And J.D. Vance had a lot of success with the line pushing back, saying, no, you voted with Joe Biden over 90% of the time. Who are you now to say that you've stood up to him? A vote for Ryan is going to be a vote for Biden, essentially. That kind of seemed to be a turning point in the race there in Ohio, and we've definitely seen that reflected in the polls as Vance now ahead even double digits in some of the latest polls. But Mairead, we really appreciate you joining us. We're going to come back to you in the good state of Ohio.
Joining us now is Mark Meckler. He's the president of Citizens for Self-Governance and Convention of States Action. Welcome, Mark.
Good to be with you.
Now, you've spent hundreds of hours calling voters and encouraging them to vote. Have you noticed a change in voters' motivation this cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you look at it, the red wave is indicative of what's going on out there emotionally. In other words, people are excited to vote. And actually, I would change the language a little bit. They're angry to vote. And so they're very upset about what's going on in the country. And it's sort of a vengeful vote. They're going to take their country back.
One thing that you've talked about that has been interesting, really stood out, was this low propensity voter. What do you mean by that? Can you explain what that means to people at
Yeah.
home?
So when we look at what I call the voter pyramid, at the top of the pyramid are people like us. We're going to vote no matter what. Nobody needs to tell us. The middle of the voter pyramid tends to be where the party works. Just get out the base. And then there are people who don't necessarily always vote. So for example, in a midterm like this, they probably vote in presidentials, but not in midterm elections. They tend to be kind of the untouched voters. There's a rich vein that can be mined there. And if you can get those people out, they make the marginal difference. So we literally have millions of activists across the country who are making hundreds of thousands of phone calls, texts, and personal peer-to-peer contact of those people to get them out to vote. In fact, those calls are going on right now, and they'll go on to about an hour before the polls close.
Now, if you had to boil this election down to one issue, it could be abortion, immigration crime, inflation, what would it be, and what are people on the ground saying?
I mean, it's really the economy. If I had to just pick one, people are saying that eggs are more expensive, that they can't fill their tanks with gas, that they're worried about heating their homes this winter. It's really basic stuff. And this is stuff that goes beyond politics because people feel it in the pocketbook. It doesn't matter what the politicians say. It doesn't matter what the statistics say. The reality is people have less money in their pockets and they're struggling.
I want to get to kind of a specific voter bloc the Democrats have relied on for a long time, Latino voters. We've seen, in the past, we've seen a Wall Street Journal poll just this week showing Republicans within 6 points. We've seen anecdotal evidence down in Texas, special elections in majority Latino districts that Republicans ended up winning. Have you noticed a shift among the Latino electorate towards Republicans? And if so, what do you think is driving that?
Yeah, it's a radical shift. We work with Robert Cahaly of Trafalgar, and we poll the issues. We've been doing that for the last couple of years every single week. And I've been watching, especially over the last 18 months, on virtually every issue, the Hispanic vote is moving to the right. So whether it's the economy or crime or education or transgender issues, at the top of the polling demographics leaning to the right is the Hispanic community, very often more than the white community in America. So those numbers are skewing issue by issue. And I think that's more important than asking just, is it Democrat or Republican? They're moving philosophically to the right.
Now, what kind of voters are you focusing on to gauge the state of the country? Is there any specific demographic that you try to focus in on? Where do you find the people that you're getting information from?
Well, I think there are two places. I mean, one is anecdotal, which is I travel a lot. I'm on the road pretty much constantly. I've been in 48 states in the last couple of years, so I'm meeting people face to face all over the country. And then what we do is we try to design our polling around what I'm hearing on the ground, and then we poll a very broad base, pretty much like any political polling. We want to see if that confirms what I'm hearing on the ground. So I'll give you an example. We time it based on what I'm hearing. So when grocery store shelves started to go empty, the pollster said, well, we should poll this. And I said, I've been on the road the last 2 weeks. Not one person has mentioned this to me. So I think it's too early to poll it. And within 2 weeks, I started hearing it everywhere I went. We polled it, and it had become a major issue. So it's first anecdotal from all of our grassroots activity at Convention of States, and then we back that up with broad-based polling.
Fascinating. Yeah, go ahead, Georgia.
So what about abortion? In May, obviously, that was on everyone's mind. Is that something that you're still hearing people talk about on the ground? Did you see a swell of that and then it subsided? What are you hearing?
Yeah, so it depends on whether we're talking Democrat or Republican. It also depends on state by state. We see in blue states or in blue strongholds in red states, that was a huge topic among Democrats. That was everything to everybody on the blue side of the aisle. On the red side, people were ecstatic about the decision. They thought, okay, now this is behind us. I don't have to worry about that as far as voting. So I don't think it ultimately washed out doing much for elections, because in blue states where they're already going to be blue and they were going to stay blue, they're very enthused about that issue. Red states, not so much. And in states that are sort of swing states, it's washed out of the mix.
Let's talk about another voting bloc that's typically been reliably blue, young people. It's been interesting looking at early voting totals. Back in 2020, about 15% of early voting came from voters under the age of 30. Obviously, that tends to benefit Democrats. This year, we're down at 5%. We've only seen 5% of early voting nationwide coming from young voters. Have you noticed a shift in the way young voters are leaning, or is it more just that they're less enthusiastic to get out this year?
So I think it's both. There's been a major shift. The polling has been extraordinary. I'm not surprised by polling. Like I said, I'm out there doing it anecdotally, so I get the results. It usually confirms what I think. What I've been surprised with is the youngest voting bloc that we gauge, 18 to 24-year-olds. I think most people would refer to that as Gen Z. They are becoming more and more conservative on the issues. I'll give you a couple specific examples. We asked if they think that it should be banned for transgender procedures to be done on minors, for puberty blocking drugs to be given to minors. We asked people that generally. The largest cohort who said that should be banned were 18 to 24-year-olds. Wow. It was over 90%. Wow. The numbers were extraordinary. Also on oil and gas exploration. Should we spend more time, more energy drilling for oil and gas in America, exploring our own reserves? Over 90% of young people. So I think the reason is they're experiencing those things most viscerally. If you're 18 years old and you're trying to put gas in your car, you're struggling to fill your tank, right? And the same is true with the transgender issue. They have friends and they've seen people going through this. It's very personal with them. They see how messed up it is, how it's messing people up. So they're against it. So, but the flip side of that is they're not Republicans. Most of them are not identifying as conservative or Republican. So I think what it does is they're identifying to the right. They don't like what Democrats are doing, so they're just not voting.
Now, can you put that 90% in context for us for the young people who are opposing the transgender treatments? What are those numbers for different age groups?
So as you go up the ages, the next cohort up is what we would normally call the millennials, really, is how we pull it. That's the group that's the most liberal. The millennials, that was probably, I'd have to go back and look at the polling, but I think it was around 45%. So it's about half of what you see objecting to these procedures.
So more than half of millennials support the treatments for
those
minors.
early treatments. And then as you go up in the age cohorts, up to 60 plus, which is our oldest, it works its way back up to over 70%. So over 65, over 70% say these things should be banned. There's that weird gap in the middle there, which is millennials, and I think they were raised in this era when all this stuff was the most acceptable, but actually wasn't going on that much. The 18 to 24-year-olds are seeing the reality. To the millennials, it was all a nice idea.
Yeah,
so a stunning difference between Zs and everyone else.
Stunning difference between Zs and everyone else.
So one thing we know without a doubt, the economy and inflation are the number one issue it's really defining the 2022 midterms. Looking back, have you seen other examples of campaigns that have been so singularly focused the way that this one has? Can you remember an election where the entire state of DC is going to hinge on one issue like this, or is this extraordinary in that regard?
I think it is extraordinary. I go back, me personally in politics, to the days of the Tea Party back 2009, 10, and it was more broad. I mean, certainly fiscal issues were part of it, but it was debt, it was inflation, it was the deficit. All those things came into play. There had been a real estate crash.
Healthcare.
Healthcare, but it wasn't just, I don't have money in my pocket anymore. I'm struggling. So this seems to be more focused than anything I've ever seen. I think there's also a pretty big focus on crime. That people don't feel safe. And this is another place that's visceral, right? If you walk down the street in your city and you don't feel safe, you know that. You don't need the politicians to tell you that. It's not about marketing or campaign commercials. These are things that real people are really experiencing.
I want to get to crime also. What have you seen? Obviously, you mentioned you get a lot of anecdotal stuff, but looking at the data, we know that Republicans, they view crime as a winning issue. They're spending a huge portion of their advertising budget on it, especially in some swing states. Wisconsin, 70% of their ad dollars are gone towards crime. Right. It's completely changed specific races, but when you look at the data, what can you see about crime? When did it become a huge issue? Has it been the entire cycle, or has it really welled up over the summer? What can you tell us?
I mean, it started with all the George Floyd riots, the riots of 2020. People started to feel unsafe. First it was seen as a positive thing. We had what people thought might have been a terrible crime committed by a police officer. That rolled into riots. Once it became riots, perception started to change nationally. Then you had the defund the police movement that follows on the heels of that. That is what really drives this into the American consciousness. The idea that we're going to make our cities safer by removing police from the streets, that resonates with the radical activists on the left, but not with anybody else. And specifically not with anybody in the African American community. One of the polling examples that I think is most poignant is 17% of African Americans think that we should lower the police presence in their communities. I mean, so it's a tiny percentage. Those are the people who are suffering the most if they're in the inner cities. Anybody in the inner cities wants more police protection, not less protection. So I think it took time to resonate as this important of an issue. We see Democrats trying to run away from it now, but they've got a long history of saying defund the police and crime increasing at the same time. Yeah,
fascinating thing we noticed was the DCCC sending out a memo telling candidates, find someone in law enforcement to cut an ad saying you don't support defunding the police. To your point, kind of shows how much things have shifted. But Mark, we really appreciate you coming on and joining us.
Great to be here.
We are certainly going to come back to you more for Morning Wire to get your takes. But Mark Meckler, President of Citizens for Self-Governance and Convention of States Action. Mark. All right, now let's turn to California, where homelessness has become a huge issue. It's a big deal everywhere, but especially out on the West Coast.
And one of our producers actually spoke to 2 business owners in LA, in the San Fernando Valley specifically, where businesses have been completely devastated by homelessness and crime. So warning to some viewers that the video we're about to show is a little bit disturbing.
My name's Paul Scrivano. I own the Blue Dog Beer Tavern in Sherman Oaks, California, city of Los Angeles. We've been open for 13 years. Sadly, I gained a little notoriety due to all this crime and homeless that we've been experiencing ever since the George Floyd riots. And it's just amplified and not getting any better. It brought with it a level of brazenness and lawlessness that lingers to today. There is no respect on the streets, no respect on the sidewalks, no respect in businesses. It turned the complexion of this beautiful little village of Sherman Oaks from friendly, happy pedestrian neighbors into rude, ignorant, brazen, horrible people running around the streets doing whatever the hell they want with no consequence, putting fear into the lives of people.
Hi, my name is Angela Marsden, and I'm the owner of Pineapple Hill Grill and Saloon in Sherman Oaks. It's been literally like living through war for 3 years. The policies are so bad that they actually raised minimum wage during the lockdown while everybody could not operate. Not one politician addressed it on the news and said, hey, we're gonna put a freeze on the minimum wage. We're gonna do things to help out the businesses because they're closing down for us to be safe, right? And that's kind of what it's been coming out of COVID, going into inflation and food costs through the roof.
Everybody's really, just kind of suffering from not only the crime that's happening, the homelessness that is causing, again, fear and uncertainty, but a government that is just about completely unresponsive. We had a stabbing at one of the restaurants that I told you is part of our group Saturday night. As I was coming here from one of our other restaurants in Los Angeles, there's the Citizen app popping up with a woman with a knife, police responding to a woman with a knife, guy with a knife coming after me 2 weeks ago.
We basically are living in an insane asylum. I've had a bartender who was attacked in a bathroom by a homeless woman. I've had a naked homeless person ride through my pub from beginning to end. 2 homeless persons get in a fight, with one with a machete and macheted an arm off of another person. I have had an MS-13 gang member threaten my cooks because they're sitting on my dining room table threatening, pick up his shirt and show his tats and say, don't f with me. Do you see this? I've had another gentleman raise a hammer and threaten my cook with a hammer. I personally was attacked by a homeless woman at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the middle of an event.
It was on Ventura Boulevard. On the way back, I see that guy sleeping at 5:30 in one of the doorways, and I see him pooping, leaning up against the door, squatting into a plastic shopping bag, plastic grocery bag, wiping his ass with towels that he steals. He gets a very certain look in his eye, which I didn't like. I see that look in his eye, and I know he's up to something. I got the window rolled up, and as soon as I got the window rolled up, he walks over and gets his bag and throws it at my windshield. The streets are filled with zombies.
You wouldn't believe it until you see it. Like you walk up to your patio and people are passed out with needles in their arm laying in your patio. I have 5 RVs lining the street to where my business is. And they're literally open air doing drugs. I can't get them to tow these RVs, right? So I find out that the city council has told the police that they're not allowed to tow the RVs anymore. That is city council tying the hands of the police who are trying to do their job. The girls at the Starbucks, they're terrorized. The manager there has been attacked. They'll have 4 or 5 guys come in and sit there and just, terrorize them. I'll be staying there to get my coffee, and these hoodlums will just walk in and grab whatever food they want and not pay for it, walk out. These are young kids, young girls, It's something like 5 homeless a day are dying on the street. And this is humane. We have a councilwoman that wants open air drug use with a supervisor.
If Karen Bass gets elected mayor, we're done. That is not hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating. If Karen Bass gets elected mayor, look for the police to be completely emasculated. We're down to 9,200 cops, 9,200.
I fully support Rick Caruso. To me, it's an obvious choice. If the other candidate wins, I know a lot of people are leaving. That if she wins, I don't have the option to leave, but I fear for what the city will turn into because it's already so bad.
Go out on Tuesday and vote. Vote for Rick Caruso. He's our only chance.
Joining us now for more on what's causing the surge in crime and homelessness in California is author and commentator Michael Schellenberger. Michael, you've been reporting on what's going on in the state for some time now. For people not as familiar with the state of things there, though, what can you tell us?
So we're in the midst of a terrible crime epidemic in California. It's hard to measure because we've just stopped enforcing a lot of laws and people have stopped reporting the crimes. But we know that San Francisco, a survey was done recently by the San Francisco Chronicle, and they found that 1 out of 4 people surveyed said they'd either been assaulted or threatened with assault in recent years. Half had been victims of theft. These are amazing numbers and comes after many months and years of gaslighting people here, denying that there's been an increase in crime. The bottom line is that we've just, when you stop enforcing laws, people stop obeying them. And so we've had very large open drug scenes that we euphemistically refer to as homeless encampments, folks that are in late stage drug addiction, untreated mental illness. And it's just gotten worse and worse. So we're starting to see a backlash against it in California, particularly in the cities. Los Angeles, there's actually a tight mayor's race.
I want to get to some of those races in a bit, but first, can you also describe kind of the state of a lot of these homeless encampments? Call them, whatever you will, but where are we seeing most of these tents set up? Where are we seeing these in the cities? Kind of give people a feel for what that's like right now as well.
Well, sure. I mean, they're everywhere. It's the feeling of chaos and things of just out of control. So we see them near highways, underneath freeway passes, but in public parks. We see them on sidewalks, on streets, near bus stops. I mean, basically all over downtown San Francisco. I mean, downtown San Francisco, it's desolate except for large groups of people doing drugs and selling drugs. It's heavily impacted large parts of Los Angeles. It's spread all throughout the city, Sacramento, along the river. So it's just, you're looking at 170,000 people or so on the streets in all of California. So, I mean, the numbers of people are enormous. It's really everywhere.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom the numbers there. And you touched on it earlier, how crime has obviously played a huge factor in a lot of these midterm races nationwide. We've seen Republicans make gains in Oregon and New York with more hard on crime messaging. How specifically, though, is it impacting the political climate in California? Are people saying we're fed up with more of these progressive DAs and these progressive candidates that push some of these more soft on crime measures? Or do you expect that they're kind of going right back to those Democrat candidates? What is it doing to shift the environment?
Oh, it's totally shifted the politics. So, in June, San Francisco voters, and those are the most liberal voters in America, they got rid of the district attorney, who was just too left-wing even for San Francisco. They got rid of 3 school board members who were trying to change the names of schools to be politically correct rather than getting kids back into schools during COVID. The district attorney that the mayor put in place in July is now going to be up for re-election, and she almost certainly is going to win. In Los Angeles, there's a race between 2 candidates. One is a former Republican who is now a Democrat, and Rick Caruso, and he's offering much stricter approach to crime and homelessness. But even the progressive Democratic candidate is offering significant change. She's been careful not to be perceived as a status quo, so she's been criticizing the status quo quite a bit. It's a source of constant conversation, within families and coffee shops, among students. It's the biggest issue in the state by far.
You touched on the mayor's race. We've been covering that pretty closely as well. Rick Caruso, spending $80 million of his own money to really blanket the airwaves with that hard on crime message. Is it working enough? Obviously, we don't have a ton of polling in that race, but do you think there's a real chance that he wins? Do you have any kind of prediction there for the race?
I mean, my prediction's, worth about as much as it costs. So, it's very close. I mean, the polls show that it's extremely close. I do think he'll win. I just think, they've done a really good job of positioning him just slightly more strict than the other candidate. They've avoided him being framed as too conservative. He obviously had a huge deficit to overcome, and just having been a former Republican, there's just overwhelmingly Democratic voters there. And it's a very, LA at this point is just as progressive as San Francisco. I mean, I sometimes think it's actually more progressive because in San Francisco, because the population is more concentrated on a smaller amount of land, they have to be a little bit more like New Yorkers, a little bit tougher. Whereas in LA, you can kind of escape into Santa Monica or into Beverly Hills or into some of these places where you can avoid the chaos and indulge in your fantasies of, a very woke, ideas. And so I think LA does have a shot of turning things around.
So in closing, what do you think would be the main solution to this? Obviously, you touched on a lot of the problems there. But if you were talking to the politicians and city leaders, what would be the first one or two things that could start to turn this problem around?
I mean, the bottom line is that you can't let people camp outside illegally. And that means you have to have sufficient shelter beds, clean, safe, basic shelter. You don't need your own private room, but people can't be on the streets. 3 times more people die on the streets than die in homeless shelters. And they die from being run over by cars, homicide, drug overdose. So you just got to get people inside. And that means you got to take emergency measures to create sufficient shelter for people. And then housing, the limited amount of publicly subsidized housing should be saved for people that are quitting drugs, taking their psychiatric meds, or making some other progress towards healing themselves and not destroying themselves. That's basically it. I mean, if you did those 2 things right there, you could basically eliminate most street homelessness within 1 to 3 years.
All right, Michael, fascinating stuff. We're going to be keeping a close eye on these races in California, but we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insight with us.
Thanks for having me.
That is author and commentator Michael Schellenberger. So fascinating stuff going on in Los Angeles and in California more broadly. One just fascinating thing, we talked all night about races that no one expected to be close. This Los Angeles mayor's race, no one expected someone like Rick Caruso, who a lot of people consider to still be a Republican, even though he's now a Democrat in name. But when you think of who people in a very liberal city like Los Angeles are going to vote for, you don't think of them voting for a billionaire businessman. We've talked earlier about some of the endorsements he's been able to bring in.
Right. So he's been endorsed by people like Gwyneth Paltrow, Kim Kardashian, Katy Perry. So he really has a solid lock on some of the celebrity votes. But what I think is important to note about the Los Angeles mayor's race is the fact that he labels himself as a Democrat is a bit of a fig leaf. This is a traditional Republican-Democrat race, but in LA, everyone has to be a Democrat because no one will dare vote for anyone who's not a Democrat. So that's the cover that these celebrities have to support someone like Rick Caruso. And now what we're going to have to find out when the votes come in is how many of the Los Angeles residents are also willing to sort of take that cover and support Rick.
It's interesting, too, the difference that money can make in a race like this. There have been candidates like Rick Caruso in the past. He obviously has more name recognition than they did, but being a billionaire businessman, he's poured $80 million of his own money into this race. His Democrat opponent, Karen Bass, about $11 million. It's the most expensive race in the history of Los Angeles, and when you're able to blanket the airwaves like that, in a relatively small race, obviously Los Angeles is a huge city, but it's not a Senate race. That kind of money goes a very long way. And it's interesting too, we've talked on the show a bit how Karen Bass has started to kind of tack towards the middle as she realizes she went from very progressive member of Congress campaigning on a lot of these progressive DAs and on a lot of these more leftist topics and issues to now saying, well, actually, the moderate approach might work. I might not get elected. So we're going to watch Los Angeles mayor's race, probably the most consequential mayor's race in the country, could be a bellwether for how the progressive Democrat movement is doing tonight.
Well, and even though Rick Caruso has a lot of money, I don't think you can actually buy an election, no matter how much money you have, if your message isn't resonating with people. Rick Caruso is out there talking about crime. Crime and to maybe a lesser extent, the economy. But crime and homelessness are the issues that people in Los Angeles find literally on their doorsteps. I say this as someone who used to live in LA. And when it comes to Karen Bass, she actually has a history that she's trying to tack away from. So in the past, she's made glowing comments about people like Fidel Castro. which she's now had to step away from. She's had some associates, close associates, people she referred to as mentors in the past who were card-carrying members of the Communist Party USA. Yeah. And she's had to go on the record and actually say, I am not a socialist. I am not a communist. So, I mean, she has had to really back away from some of her roots, and maybe people won't believe it.
Yeah, that is a race again that we didn't expect to be following, but we're going to be talking about a lot. I'm sure we're going to follow up with it on Morning Wire. Georgie, you love talking about everything going on in LA on Morning Wire. It's fascinating stuff, kind of a microcosm of more of these progressive cities.
Now, joining us live, speaking of Morning Wire, is Daily Wire's culture reporter and regular contributor to Morning Wire, Megan Basham. Megan, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. I haven't seen you in so long.
Hello, hello.
Now, how would you describe the situation with social media companies when it comes to elections? That's something you've been covering a lot on the show.
Yeah, it feels like sometimes half my job is tracking Twitter, tracking what's happening on Facebook. And it makes sense, really, because what we have is the most sort of vital battleground for where ideas are discussed now. It's where candidates put their messages out. It's where people debate ideas. And so that's why I think both the left and right have become so committed to trying to claim this ground. So when this really kicked up was in 2016, a lot of Democrats faulted Facebook. They faulted Twitter for Trump's election. Basically, they said if you guys hadn't allowed what they called foreign interference and propaganda, Trump wouldn't have been elected. And so after that, what we started to see were a lot of congressional hearings. You saw a lot of Democrats grilling leaders like Meta's Mark Zuckerberg, saying, how did you let this happen? Well, the next thing we saw was in the 2020 election, I think smarting from some of that criticism, these same tech guys turned around and they got a bit heavy-handed in 2020. And so then what we saw them doing was things like suppressing the New York Post's Hunter Biden laptop story. And so from that, there was a huge backlash. And you had Republicans going, you could have cost our guy the election. So really, it's just been a lot of whiplash back and forth. And they're caught in a really uncomfortable position now.
Yeah, so that's the history of it. That's where they've been. Where are they now, though? Where do you view these companies being at the moment and then looking ahead with the election tonight?
Well, and it's funny because you want to say, all right, I'll give you guys some grace because you're in a tough position, and you do get that because, look, both sides are constantly threatening to call them up on more hearings, more Senate questioning. So I do understand that, but the truth of the matter is that they are much more inclined to do the will of Democrats than they are of Republicans. And we see that in certain things like the fact that 95% of political contributions from companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, they go to Democrats. And actually, I think in Twitter, it's a little higher than that. It's something close to 98%. I'm surprised there's even 2% that are going to Republicans, but there's a little bit there. So in that case, they really are trying to work on behalf of Democrats. Whether that's going to change, we'll talk about in a minute. But part of what you're really seeing then also is that they are now formally partnering with the DOJ, with the Department of Homeland Security. We saw that with Twitter specifically. Their chief policy advisor, the person who set their content moderation policies, was actually arguing for the DOJ to become more aggressive in policing speech. Oh. So, I do have some sympathy, but at the same time, I think they went from doing it reluctantly to now they have done it fairly aggressively.
Well, there was also the headline that broke just a few weeks ago about the Google lawsuit that Republicans or some Republican groups have brought to Google regarding campaign emails being sent to spam at much higher rates if they came from a Republican versus if they came from a Democrat. And there are also, I don't think they've sued yet, but there's an investigation into the search algorithm, which seems to be promoting Democrat campaign websites to the top of the first page, whereas they are burying the Republican opponent, on the second and third page of the search. What do we know about that and where it's standing?
Well, what we know is that lawsuits are coming. That's what we know. And we know that, Republicans caught this. And I think that is where we're at now, is that a lot of these matters are going to have to be adjudicated in the courts because they are now acting as activists. With one now very recent and very noteworthy exception, They've been very willing to do what the Democrats want, and I think we've gotten to a point now where they do it without being asked.
Yeah, there's this guy that I keep seeing on my Twitter. His name is Elon Musk, I believe.
Something like that.
Something like that. What have you seen? What has that shakeup done for the entire space, and what does it mean for Twitter?
Wow, it's very early days, obviously. So, I mean, it's hard to even tear your eyes away from what's happening at Twitter. He said it's the most interesting place on the internet, and it's hard to disagree.
It's fun to watch.
He is fun to watch,
Yeah.
and to that point, it hasn't even been 2 weeks now since Elon took over Twitter, and he has already said, he put out a message to independent-minded voters yesterday and said, because I value balanced government, something to that effect, I'm going to encourage everyone to vote for Republicans. And that just kind of blew my mind. I mean, who saw that coming?
Right. Well, and that's almost more heavy-handed even, or at least overtly, than we've seen from some of the other platforms. Although you could argue that some of the behind-the-scenes actions carried more weight than just a verbal endorsement.
Right, and in a way, I actually respect that more. I go, look, Elon Musk has free speech like everyone else. So if he wants to go on the platform and use his own Twitter account to say, this is what I advise, that is in a way much more relatable and much more defensible than doing it behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I do want to add that while that Google issue was happening, at the same time, we are starting to see Twitter and Facebook, I think because of all that backlash, particularly over that Hunter Biden story, they have way curtailed back their misinformation, speech policing this cycle, to the point that you've seen the Washington Post, the New York Times, reporting on the fact that, hey, why aren't they doing more speech policing? So you're seeing some legacy media outlets kind of upset about it. There's been reporting that civil rights groups are upset about it. So in a way, you're going, okay, they're just seesawing back and forth. But yes, the Google issue shows some of it's still happening, behind the scenes.
Megan, we have you wear many hats on the Morning Wire team. We're going to have you do the same thing on the Election Wire pre-show because we're talking to you about big tech, but we want to shift gears a little bit now. And all election cycle, we've been hearing rumors of a red wave, red tsunami.
Yes.
Now we're hearing a new term, red mirage. What does that mean? Walk us through it. What's going on
Well, we
here?
remember that term. It's not new. That one is an old chestnut, the red mirage from last election cycle.
It is.
Been around for ages.
That feels like it was 2 decades ago, even though I was sitting in this very chair 2 years ago on election night talking about all of this. But it's now back. So what's going on with the red mirage right now? What does all this mean?
Well, what's funny is part of what's bothering me about this notion of the red mirage is what you're seeing is ABC, CNN, Fox, really all of the outlets, PBS, they're all saying, look, it is normal for it to look like Republicans are going to win on election night. And then as these absentee ballots start coming in, as the mail-in votes start coming in, those margins start to be whittled away and perhaps even disappear. So what they're saying is, look, we may not know who wins tomorrow. We may not know in a few days. We may not know in a few weeks. And that's the part where I go, I don't know how normal that is. I don't remember that when I was a kid. I don't remember it taking a really long time to find out who would win.
Well, and Kareem Jean-Pierre just Monday said, and that's the way it's supposed to be.
Right. And I think that's the part where you can go, this is very debatable. Now, as to why it's happening, largely it's because we have been expanding the period of early voting. We've been expanding the mail-in voting opportunities, the absentee ballot opportunities. And so 2 things that does. One, it does take longer to count the votes, particularly in those states where they have laws on the books that say you can't start counting until election night. On the flip side, though, look, we do know that there is more opportunity for some shenanigans, let's say, when you do not have a tighter, more restricted voting period. And so for that reason, people do tend to get skeptical and they do start to wonder, why do we need to have election season instead of election day or even election week? And I think that's a legitimate question that people need to start asking is it necessary to have such loose voting standards?
Right, well, and not all states do, which is kind of the proof point that no, you don't actually have to have these loose standards. For example, New Hampshire doesn't have early voting.
Right.
And then you look at European countries, Canada, where they seem to do things in a much tighter fashion. And frankly, they have IDs and they have paper voting in person on election day.
India has 750 million voters out of 1 billion people, and they typically will count election results within a day or two.
Right, so
as well.
it's happening.
It is possible.
It's happening in other countries, yeah.
And so we want to talk about another voting issue that's going on. Everyone on Twitter is talking about it, and around the country. We have to bring it up. What's going on in Arizona right now? We still don't have a ton of details, but you've been following this story all day. What's going on in Maricopa County? A lot of people saying, wait, Maricopa County, I'm familiar with this in 2020. What's going on there right now?
Yeah, as we talk about things that are undermining trust in our electoral system, this is a good example. So what we're hearing right now is that at all the various voting locations, that some of the machines are down and up to 20 to 25% of the locations are experiencing problems. We're hearing that voters are showing up to vote and they're being told, we can't allow you to vote here. We don't have the systems up. You're going to have to go find somewhere else. People are getting very upset. A name we know well, Harmeet Dillon, who was our attorney representing us before the Supreme Court over COVID vax mandates. She is out there working with the GOP saying, look, we have resources. Go online, go to her Twitter. She's someone who has said, come to my Twitter. She has posted resources where you can find your location to get out and vote. But she is saying there are some places that have shorter lines. But the thing that makes this really troubling is that who was in charge of the election process there in Arizona?
Katie Hobbs.
That's right. So Kari Lake's opponent is the person in charge. And yet we have her saying, gosh, I don't know what happened. People aren't being allowed to vote. They're not being able to vote. They're being turned away. And at the same time, we also have election officials having to apologize to people for not being able to vote.
And
well, what about early voting? I mean, were they not using the same machines? Do we know? How was this not discovered until Election Day?
You know, that's a really good question. I'm going to have to look into that. Okay. A lot of that was probably in mail-in voting, and so you wouldn't have found it.
And to that point, you mentioned election officials apologizing. For people at home who are saying, well, is this just some people that are seeing a few videos online and extrapolating out a bigger problem? This is an official statement just issued by Stephen Richer. This is the Maricopa County Recorder. He said, I'm very sorry for any voter who has been frustrated or inconvenienced today in Maricopa County. Every legal vote will be tabulated, I promise. State statute has long governed the Division of Labor in Arizona Election Administration. He goes on to say later, I will continue, blah, blah. Sorry, I want to make sure I get the relevant parts. Right. The Board of Supervisors has now identified the problem and has begun fixing affected voting locations. The Board of Supervisors is also advising all affected voters to do one of the following: place the ballot in door 3. So they give other options. One is being go to a different voting location. There are 223 voting locations in the county. But the Board of Supervisors is now saying openly, we have identified the problem, which is admitting that there is a problem there. So that's coming from Maricopa County officials.
Yeah, and I think we want to be clear about that this is not us just arbitrarily saying, gosh, maybe these internet rumors are true. It's not that. This is happening. They're addressing it. People are in some locations being told they're going to have to go vote somewhere else. So that's not speculation.
Right. There's a lot of people who are only given a short period of time off of work to go vote. There's people who are going to be frustrated. There are people who are just for their own time constraints are going to have to abandon the effort. So this is going to disadvantage people who were planning on voting a day of.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot more, I'm sure, coming out of Arizona. We're going to be covering all of it. The gentlemen later tonight are going to be discussing it as well on the main election show. But we want to go now. Megan, stick around. We've got some more questions that we're going to be answering with Megan. So go ahead now. Get your questions in the comment section for Megan, for Georgia, and myself as well. We're going to get to as many of those as we can. But for now, we're going to hear from some more voters that we spoke to from around the country to see what is really motivating them this election season.
I'd say inflation.
Cost of living versus wage, like the average wage versus cost of living.
Probably the economy.
When it came down to like the vaccine mandates, part of my family's vaccinated, part of us is not, but I'm just like, people need to have a right to choose.
The homeless issue, again, Fresno's not huge, but anytime you go towards LA or San Francisco, I mean, it just, like I said, even in Fresno, we watch it creep up farther and farther into more affluent neighborhoods, and it's been real tough to deal with.
And I didn't want to have my child get the vaccine as a 5-year-old. Luckily, the parents spoke up and we voted it out, and we got the school district to not do that. Same thing with the masks. My daughter was the only child in the entire kindergarten in her school with a mask exemption. I mean, nobody's going to teach my child about sex, or, you know, I don't care if it's same sex or heterosexual sex, it's sex. I can teach my kid that at home.
Look at the unemployment rate, look at the track, look at the jobs that, the job availability.
All right, always very nice to hear from voters, and it's also always nice to hear from viewers as well. You guys have been commenting. We've had our wonderful intern Elizabeth start picking out some of these questions. We've all got the questions. We're going to pick some of our favorites each. Georgia, we're putting you on the spot. What are you going with first?
All right, so is Daily Wire considering making Morning Wire a video cast? And they also said you do a great job. Thank you. Oh yes, we get pressure for that weekly, I would say. The thing is, we put out 12 shows a week. We have our daily regular newscast Monday through Saturday, and then we have our afternoon edition, and then we have our extended Sunday episode. And between all of that, it's a heavy lift to begin with, so it's been difficult for us to get a video version off the ground, but it is something that we consider, and certainly it's an aspiration we have.
Yeah. What election are you most invested in the outcome of? This one sticks out to me. The one that comes to mind first is Pennsylvania. This is, obviously, it's always a battleground state, always one that we're tracking, but we've covered it so much on Morning Wire because it is just an interesting race. There are so many different dynamics at play. There was a brutal, bruising primary that Republicans had. President Trump coming in, endorsing Dr. Oz, kind of pushing him over the edge. There were questions of whether Oz would coalesce the Republican base, whether they would coalesce around him. They appear to have done so. There's an interesting governor's race there with Mastriano. There's Fetterman, who, you know, in most elections, I think his debate performance on October 26th, where he was incoherent, there's no other way to put it, in many of those answers, that would have doomed many campaigns. That didn't seem to doom his campaign. It's still close. So this is a race that has so many fascinating dynamics, and it's a true toss-up. A lot of times things are deemed toss-ups where you kind of have an idea of who's going to win. We have no idea who's going to win in Pennsylvania. So that's the one I think I'm most interested in.
I'm going to combine two questions because, you know, it's my turn, so I can do what I want. My favorite here is how is religion affecting the election? And by the way, there's also a question of what's your favorite thing to report on? And I love to report on religion. So as they know, I'm always pitching religion stories. So a lot of what we're seeing here is that people of faith are getting to a point where I think it's really difficult for them to support the Democratic Party. Not only have there been issues of life, a lot of people who are Christians, who are Jewish, who are Catholic, whatever their religious faith, most of them tend to be pro-life. So we're seeing that being a major motivating factor. But we also now have the trans issue. So look, it's hard to get more fundamental than Genesis, male and female, he created them. So you're seeing a lot of people of faith say, look, we cannot support a party that does not know what a woman is, doesn't know what a man is, and frankly doesn't know what a family is. So I think that that has been a major motivating factor, and I think it's a large part of why we're starting to see something of a Hispanic exodus from the Democrat Party.
All right, so the question I'm going to cover is, how do you choose which stories to cover on Morning Wire, and what do you see as reoccurring themes in the news? So a lot of people think we get to work at 3 in the morning and we crank this out between 3 and 4:30. That's actually not the case. We will work throughout the week to pick our stories, and sometimes we'll do it in the 11th hour, but sometimes we'll record a day or two in advance based on when the story drops. So I usually get in the morning, and I start looking at all the major news sources, New York Times, Fox News. We have some of our more independent sites that we look at, but I'll look at ABC, Wall Street Journal, and John and I, Lisa, our producer, Cabot and Megan will weigh in, and we just discuss amongst ourselves and we have this long text thread, we discuss which stories we think are thematically most important, as in they affect the most Americans. And then also, we like to make sure there's a good broad balance of domestic versus overseas. And then sometimes we have our pet issues, which, like Megan mentioned, I like to cover education. I'm a former public school teacher. Cabot, I think you like polling.
I love looking at all the election data. And one thing I'll say that's fun, there have been so many nights where I'll get home and there will be some big story going on, and I'm just waiting for my phone to start buzzing because it's like, all right, we're going back to studio. Let's do this thing. And whenever my phone is buzzing, my wife just knows, here, it's the Morning Wire group chat. Here, take it. She knows what it is. So that is...
It's a hop-in chat, I gotta say.
It really is. All right, so Do you miss LA? I was only there actually for a couple weeks. I joined the Daily Wire team right before the election last time, so you can't really miss what you never knew.
Did you move there?
No, I lived in a hotel for about 2 or 3 weeks, so that was very fun. But the other question about LA here, do you think that California and LA are past the point of no return? This is an interesting one. My gut says no, because as a Christian, I believe that no person is ever past past the point of no return. There's no such thing as too far gone. And the state is comprised of people, but I also understand that as a Christian, people are inherently flawed, and that you have leaders sometimes that can do some major damage. I still don't think all hope is ever lost for a place in America. I mean, back in the 80s, you had Ronald Reagan that was coming out as the governor of, or late 70s, as the governor of a place like California. We've got a state like New York where there's a governor's race that could go for a completely different party than they've had. So you see that states can seesaw back and forth. And also, I think the Caruso-Bass race in Los Angeles is a great example of that. People in Los Angeles, voters are, one of the rallying cries they were saying was, we don't want to be San Francisco. And they're already very close to it in many ways, but I think the fact that enough people are willing to push back, I don't think any place is ever too far gone. Some are just maybe closer to too far gone than others.
Well, also, sometimes the consequences are enough to teach people to move. You know, I don't know, the consequences of bad policies are kind of the cure for bad policies, because people get to their breaking point.
Yeah, and hopefully, I'm sure there are people in the comments that are saying, no, Los Angeles is dead forever, it's gone.
It's not dead
If
forever.
the king of Nineveh can repent, Gavin Newsom can repent. That's what I'm going with.
Megan, what other questions do you got? Any others that jump out
Yeah, you know
there?
what I really want to answer is, have you ever gotten to smoke a cigar? A stogie. It says a stogie with Michael Knowles. Now, I have not, but let me tell you, I have in my possession a cigar that was in the Rush Limbaugh collection, because I did Claremont Fellowship, which Michael also did over the summer, and Stephen Limbaugh, his cousin, was in my class, and Stephen knows Michael very well. He gave me a Rush Limbaugh cigar, and I said, oh, Michael Knowles asked if he could have one too, and Stephen said no, he doesn't get one until he smokes one with me, and so I'm going to tell Michael that as well, that I will use my connections to get you a Rush Limbaugh cigar when I am invited to the cigar party. I think there's enough of this boys club in the cigar party.
I'll add one more thing there. I've never smoked a cigar with Michael, but I have smoked one of Michael's cigars. The most Michael Knowles thing in the world, for people at home wondering, is Michael really this cigar smoking, guy all the time? When Michael's child was born, his firstborn child, he didn't bring, celebratory cake. He didn't send out letters to everyone announcing the birth. He brought in cigars wrapped in, I believe it was an It's a Boy cigar was what he had wrapped.
Classic.
And he gave out cigars to everyone to celebrate the birth of his firstborn, which, thank you, Michael, for that cigar. It was fantastic. But that's just the most Michael Knowles thing that I could ever imagine. I like that question.
I like it. It's a throwback, classic move. Yeah.
Georgia, you got any on there jumping out?
Well, okay.
All right, this is the beauty of live TV. We're getting told that we're going to wrap.
I did, but we'll
You did
move
have
on.
one in the producer's After your question, Georgia, you're going to get to it now.
I have one more that I want to do. Who are your favorite summer Morning Wire interns? And I have to say, Elizabeth and Lucy,
There we
both
go.
of which are somewhere.
They're helping us
They're
tonight.
helping us out
Elizabeth and
tonight.
Lucy, you guys are doing-
We brought them back for this.
Great job. All right, well, Megan, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue to hear from you throughout the evening, and you're going to be all over Morning Wire, as always.
Yes, as always.
I'll be here late too.
All right.
See you later,
we've
guys.
been, sorry to cut you off, Megan. I apologize. We've been talking a lot so far about the biggest races in the Senate, but do not forget about those governor's races around the country. 36 governor spots are up for grabs, but the one getting the most attention, especially lately, is in Michigan, where Republican Tudor Dixon is looking to pull off the upset on Democrat incumbent Gretchen Whitmer. Georgia, you got the chance to go follow Tudor on the campaign trail. What was that like?
Oh, it was fabulous, and I got to spend about 45 minutes with her and Tulsi Gabbard on the bus, and I got to go to a couple of her events and talk to some of her voters. So we actually have a video that you guys can check out to see how that went.
We have 9 days left. We have 9 days left to put an administration in office that respects your individual liberties, respects the police, wants to change what's happening in our education system and make sure that Gretchen Whitmer never serves in office again in the state of Michigan.
We are in Detroit, Michigan, and we're going to be spending the day today with Republican gubernatorial candidate Tudor Dixon. And hopefully we'll have a little time to talk to the voters, too, to find out what they care about with this election coming up. So how's it been?
good, very good. It's been kind of shocking for the Democrats because the momentum has been such a quick swing.
Tudor Dixon won the Republican primary on August 3rd, just days after receiving a last-minute endorsement from President Trump.
I had one of the folks from the media ask me an interesting question. She said, I listened to your acceptance speech, and I listened to your speech tonight, and I think you hit Whitmer pretty hard. Do you think that you're coming off as a mean girl? The truth hurts.
With almost no name recognition, she was trailing incumbent Governor Gretchen Whitmer by almost 20 points. But within weeks, she had cut Whitmer's lead in half. And by October, the two women were in a dead heat.
All across this country, we have a very clear choice between those who are more interested in furthering their own selfish ambition versus strong, courageous leaders who are committed to upholding the Constitution. Tudor Dixon is one of those leaders.
Dixon received some unexpected help on the campaign trail from former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Gabbard announced she was leaving the Democratic Party in October and has since been traveling to campaign with candidates like Carrie Lake, Joe Kent, as well as Tudor Dixon.
Tulsi, how did you choose Tudor as someone you were going to campaign with?
I mean, really for a lot of the reasons that she's talked about. Democrats at different levels across the country are cowering in fear of these radical woke ideologues who are in control of the party. When you put Tudor Dixon up against Gretchen Whitmer, there's no comparison when you're looking who's the right leader for the right time in this state.
You ready to take our state back?
She's honest with the people. She's committed. She can persevere. She has a plan. She doesn't just talk about a plan like Gretchen Whitmer. She tells us what she'll do, how she'll do it.
I think there was also the Roe v. Wade, and there was some doldrums after that where it was like, oh, no red wave.
And that has definitely been their message.
When Roe fell, Mrs. Dixon celebrated that. I am fighting to protect our right to choose.
Now, there's a ballot measure on the ballot this year in Michigan to add abortion as a constitutional right.
So now people are starting to say, okay, well, if you wanted to vote for that, you can vote for that separately. But really, what are we going to do to get our kids back on track?
Mrs. Dixon says that I kept students out longer than any other state. That's just not true. Kids were out for 3 months.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I just heard an audible gasp around town when Gretchen Whitmer said that kids were out of school for 3 months. We even had schools that were closed this year. This is shocking to me.
Not on my watch. That doesn't happen in a Dixon administration. And we'd like to put a focus on reading, writing, and math. Get away from some of this woke stuff.
Dearborn, Michigan is a heavily Muslim community, and the Muslim community has always voted Democrat. I had a man come to one of our rallies a few weeks ago, and he said, we found these books in our school, and I went to the Democrat elected officials and said, we've got to do something about this. They pretty much told him, we want nothing to do with you. He said I was called a bigot and a racist. And he said, I'm done. I will never be a Democrat again. I won't be voting for a Democrat. And he said, I'm going to talk to the people in my community and tell them they need to vote for a Republican. Because it was funny, he said, no matter what the issue is, environment or all of this other stuff that the Democrats are talking about, he said, at the end of the day, my kids are the most important thing to me. And if they're not willing to stand up for my kids, then I'm done with their party.
Yesterday, they had Barack Obama here. Did you hear that?
I'm going to read you 2 headlines. One says, Whitmer signs order aimed at lowering insulin costs in Michigan. These are actual headlines. All right. Second headline, Michigan Governor hopeful Tudor Dixon eaten by zombies in gory horror film. I don't actually have anything else to say.
He's not attacking my policies or my plan because he can.
Everything is going up. Cost of gas, childcare, even a box of cereal costs $4. Look, I can't solve the inflation problem,
Gretchen Whitmer has come out and been very clear that she believes there's nothing she can do on inflation, but she's actually had several opportunities to put money back into the pockets of people. So we know there's an opportunity to reduce the personal income tax, to give a gas tax holiday, to make sure that we make it less expensive for Michiganders here to live. I mean, I've obviously been vocal about the policies that President Trump brought to the state of Michigan, and that's something that was crushed in just such a short period of time since he left office. My father brought a steel foundry in Michigan. I worked with him on the shop floor for many years, so I got to know the heavy equipment industry, but also the automotive industry, the big automotive companies. They're obviously not coming to Michigan. You see them building new factories. They're going to Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Indiana. So when I talk to these young men about, we don't have this national security issue taken care of when it comes to people understanding metal and how to make metal, they said, gosh, it's funny because every time I heard America first, I never really got it until I realized once we lose it, we don't have it.
Yeah. Now, your things that you were talking about were business, education. What was your third one? That was your crime.
We are also going to restore public safety. I want to put $1 billion new into policing to make sure we can recruit and retain police officers, to bring back honor to that career.
Crime is rising across the country. You've seen a rise in crime of 4%. Michigan is over 8%. Michigan has 4 of the 20 most dangerous cities in the country. We had Barack Obama kind of mocking the whole crime issue.
There's a lot of talk about crime right now. It's gone up in conservative and rural areas, not just in the city. Over the last 7 years, not just the last 2, by the way, they act like the other guy wasn't president when some of this stuff was happening.
One of the local papers did an article saying that we have lost a police officer a day in Detroit this year. That's shocking. When you don't have the support of the chief executive officer of the state.
Governor Whitmer joined to express her support for the spirit of calls to defund the police.
She vetoed funding for secondary road patrols. She vetoed funding for corrections officers. Now, in the last few weeks of the campaign, all of a sudden she supports police. They don't want to put their lives on the line every day because the cops are telling me, man, we could get shot or we could go to jail, and it's not worth it. But if you don't provide public safety, which is one of the fundamentals of government, then you're going to have people run wild, and we certainly don't want to end up in a situation like we see in New York right now.
When you listen to what Tudor Dixon is talking to people about, what she's hearing from people, it doesn't get any more real than fighting for your kids, fighting for your jobs, fighting for our economy, fighting for safety and security. It does not get any more real than that, which again just shows how out of touch Barack Obama is, and frankly, Gretchen Whitmer as well.
I don't think people understand and appreciate what we have here, and I want to protect it, and Tudor Dixon will do that.
The future of our students and really the future of our state is on the line right now. We have to get our kids back on track. We have to also make sure that we have safe cities, and we have to make sure that people can achieve the American dream. Those are all things that we can do if we get Gretchen Whitmer out of office.
All right, I mentioned earlier that I have been keeping a very close eye on Pennsylvania, as voters around the country have. No surprise, it's a huge swing state. So we have got one of our reporters there, Ben Zeisloff, one of our fantastic writers. He is outside of Philadelphia at the Oz campaign headquarters. Ben Zeisloff, what are we looking at?
Hey Kevin, thanks for having me. I'm here at Dr. Oz's headquarters just outside of Philadelphia in Newtown, which is in the suburbs. As you can see, they're still kind of setting up. It's pretty chaotic here with the media starting to set up their equipment. But what I've seen here is there's a lot of enthusiasm from both sides. I've got to talk to a lot of voters today. Republicans are motivated by voting in Mastriano, even though they've said they haven't seen very much of him through this campaign cycle, as well as blocking Fetterman. As we know, there's been a lot of questions about Oz's conservative bona fides. And on the Democratic side, they're motivated by a lot of issues, abortion, of course, but there's also election, voting rights. I've heard a lot from Democrats today, too. So that's what's going on here.
Hours in. If you've been watching the whole time, I commend you. All of you are invited to my birthday party this year. That's a lie. I'm not having a birthday party. I actually am. All of you are invited. Thank you. So if you're just tuning in, what took you so long? We still love you. You're also invited to my party. But anyways, thank you all for being here with us. I'm just weird. I'm a weird guy. It's 3 hours in. I'm starting to get a little crazy, and we've got a long night ahead of us. We've still got more interviews with candidates. We've got more battleground rundowns and a lot more exciting stuff coming throughout the next couple hours. But first, Georgia, what are we looking at?
So one of the biggest polling trends that we've been watching this season is the Latino vote. And we saw a number of Republicans win races in the heavily Hispanic Rio Grande Valley just earlier this summer. And there are a lot of indications that the Democrat lead with Latinos has shrunk significantly. And there was a recent poll out of the Wall Street Journal that found Republicans within 5 points of Democrats among Latino voters, which, by the way, is historic. Yeah. And Cabot, you got a chance to talk to someone very special earlier today who represents that shifting Latino vote.
I did. I got the chance to talk to Congresswoman Mayra Flores. Now, she won that special election in Texas's 34th congressional district about a year ago. She's up for re-election in a newly redrawn district. But the reason that she was so important, it's not just any house race that happened. Her district, the 34th district in Texas, had not gone to a Republican since 1870. 1870. And she was the one that came in. It's a heavily Hispanic district, one of the, I believe it's the second highest population of Hispanic voters in the country for any district. So for a Republican to have success there, initially people said, well, it's an outlier. But she is saying that this is something that is actually going to have national implications. We're starting to see more polling data bear that out. So tonight, she says that we could see a red wave among the Latino community. Here's what she said in our conversation earlier today. Joining us now is Texas Congresswoman Mayra Flores. Congresswoman, thanks for making time for us.
Absolutely. Very exciting day, election day.
I saw on Twitter this morning that you tweeted a photo of a big red wave. It was sort of a red tsunami. Walk me through why you're so optimistic. Why are you, so confident that we're going to see that red wave today?
Well, I'm very confident in my district. My South Texas has always been very conservative. We're people of God, people of family, people of hard work. We have always been conservative. It's in our DNA. It runs in our blood. I was born in Mexico, raised with those values, and I came here to the United States when I was 6 years old, and those values still live in me. And I want to make sure that our conservative values live in our children and the future generations. And that is just who we are in South Texas. I'm not surprised to see what's happening in South Texas, but I'm very happy, that for all the love and support that we're getting from the entire district. But the impact that we're going to have here in South Texas isn't just going to impact South Texas. It's going to impact the entire nation.
So let's talk about your district in specifics. What is the number one issue that you see voters there bringing up the most? When you're talking to them on the trail, what are the one or two things that they're most concerned with?
The economy, inflation, and border security. Those are the top three issues in my district and in the entire country. And we're not the exception. We're all hurting tremendously. I met a single mom who said that for the first time she had to get a loan to buy her kids school supplies and school clothes for the first time, and is now paying a 24% interest rate on that loan and doesn't have enough money at the end of the month to pay for that loan. These are the issues that are hurting tremendously the American people. And not just, single moms, of course, our elderly community, families, all across this nation. We don't have the money that we had 2-3 years ago. We're not able to provide for our families, for our children, the life that we were able to 2-3 years ago. And we want our lives back,
One thing that we've noticed about your race in particular that's been very interesting and has a lot of people in the media kind of has their heads exploding where they see the way that you campaign on immigration. You talk about having a strong border. You talk about your husband being in Border Patrol. And a lot of, I think, outside observers kind of thought that message would not resonate with Hispanic and Latino voters. Clearly it has, though. Why do you think that is?
Well, because we live in South Texas, we see what's happening, in our backyards. I'm from Tamaulipas. Most of the people here in South Texas are also from Tamaulipas. We have families in Tamaulipas that we're not able to visit as often because of the criminal organizations that have taken over the southern border. So we know that illegal immigration is funding these criminal organizations that have taken the peace away from people of Mexico and also have taken us, the liberty to visit our loved ones. So, we don't need to see it on the news. It's in our backyard, how dangerous our borders are, and how, women and children are being abused by these criminal organizations. We want to defund the cartel. Our opponent, they want to defund the police. We have to secure our borders and allow our Border Patrol agents. And by the way, most of our Border Patrol agents are Hispanics. They're our sons, daughters. They're familia. So when they disrespect our men and women in Border Patrol and law enforcement, they're disrespecting our family.
So in closing, what does a Republican majority in the House mean for pushing back against President Biden? For Republicans at home who are wondering, what does taking the House do for us? Walk us through what that would look like having a Republican majority.
So I believe that we need to put the American people's best interests first and not what's best for a political party. We need to strengthen the economy for everyone. We need to bring down inflation. We need to secure the borders. These are the top 3 issues that we need to work very hard and take care of these issues first before we move forward to anything. We have to impeach Mayorkas. That is part of securing the border. We have to remove him and put the right person in that position that is actually going to stand up for our men and women. We need someone to stand with our Border Patrol agents, with our law enforcement. So he needs to be impeached. Now, a lot of people have brought up to me, well, do you believe in impeaching Biden? Look, I'm not a fan of Kamala Harris either. So she's just as useless. So it's a waste of time. Let's get to it. Let's strengthen our economy. Let's reduce inflation, and let's secure our borders and put pressure on the Biden administration to do so as well.
All right, well, Congresswoman, we appreciate you making time today on this election day. Good luck today. We're really pulling for you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
God bless you.
All right, that's Congresswoman Mayra Flores of the state of Texas.
So impeach Mayorkas, some strong words coming from a brand new Congresswoman, Mayra Flores.
She came out swinging. Sometimes when you're talking to politicians and elected officials in general, you have to kind of pry stuff out of them, and you're asking questions, hoping that they'll give you something. She came out swinging though. She was ready. She knew exactly what she wanted to say, and yeah, I think for Republicans at home saying, well, what happens if Republicans take the House? Oversight power is a very serious thing to have in D.C., and she's kind of hinting at how Republicans will use that investigative and oversight power that comes with control of Congress.
So I'm not sure if we mentioned this. Mayra Flores is actually a historic candidate. Yeah. She is, I believe, the first Mexican-born female congresswoman in the U.S., not just in South Texas. And she's part of a trend that we saw just mid-summer. You may remember there were some headlines about this. Yeah. The rise of the far-right Latino is one that comes to mind. She has 2 other colleagues that are also in South Texas districts that are young female Latina candidates that are looking to flip districts.
And when I was researching Mayra before, or Congresswoman Flores, excuse me, before that interview, one thing that was interesting, a lot of people online saying, if this were a Democrat candidate, everyone would already know who she is. Everyone would know the first Mexican-born woman. She would have a cover on Vogue, all sorts of those things. But a lot of people, pointing that out. But definitely a historic candidate in many ways, and very impressive. And she knows what she wants to do if Republicans get control of Congress. Now, Georgia, we mentioned earlier some of these governor's races. I've been very open about the fact of how jealous I am that you got to go on the road with Tudor Dixon and also with Kari Lake. What was that experience like? What was the atmosphere like in Arizona?
So I sensed that the people in Arizona were completely fed up with the border situation. And you hear that from people across the country. People want a closed border. But when it comes to people in Arizona, it is literally their backyard. We heard from people who described seeing kids shooting up on the streets. One gentleman we spoke to, you may recall from the video, he said, when the drug dealers have been through because you see all the kids are strung out. People also were talking about crime. They were also talking about inflation. So definitely the issues that Republicans have been hitting hard are the issues that people in Arizona were talking about. When it comes to Kari Lake herself, I would say I was impressed with her as a candidate and as a person. She is extremely poised. She's extremely warm. I understand why she has rocketed to fame the way she has. She has a way of connecting with people just face to face, in person, and she's able to bring that energy to the television screen. Obviously, from 27 years as a news anchor, she was able to hone that skill. So it's not surprising to me that she's been able to achieve the success she has in such a short time.
Yeah, and we've got some more clips of your interaction with her, as well as Blake Masters, someone the Republicans are counting on tonight to take down incumbent Democrat Mark Kelly in the Senate. Very important state there in Arizona if Republicans want to get a majority in D.C. Let's see some more of your conversation with them.
I left the free state of Florida to come out here and support what I think is the best ticket in the entire country. When they win, are we going to call it MAGA-zona? Or are we going to call it Carry-zona?
Arizona is the most hotly contested state in the midterm elections. Longtime news anchor and first-time gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake has been painted by the national media as the face of election denial. I wanted to get an inside perspective on the Kari Lake phenomenon, so I flew out to Phoenix to hear from Kari herself and Arizona voters.
Now, they all claim that we're domestic terrorists. They're calling me saying that we're spreading white supremacy views. I'm the son of Syrian immigrants, and I look around here. Look at this. America's e pluribus unum, out of many one, right?
Yo nací en Colombia, pero soy americana ante todo. Y yo sé lo que es estar en un comunismo. Nuestros países en Latinoamérica están perdidos completamente. Así es que nosotros no podemos dejar que esto pase en nuestro país aquí.
When I walk into the floor of the United States Senate, I walk into the most narrowly divided United States Senate we've had in U.S. history over this duration. It's 50-50. When the Senate is tied 50-50, who breaks the tie? The Vice President comes down and breaks the tie. Kamala Harris has broken more ties than all but 2 vice presidents in our nation's history. We've had 49 vice presidents in our nation's history. Rather than having Kamala Harris break the ties, how about we elect Blake Masters and we'll be more tie?
It's the best you can do, but I think it's going to work.
I mean, it's his future, their future, my granddaughter's future that's at stake now. The border, the reckless spending, the fentanyl is outrageous, out of hand. It's worse than heroin. It's worse than half the drugs that have ever come in. You need to start prosecuting these people instead of letting them out of jail.
And close the border. They need to close the border. It's ridiculous.
It needs to change, and these 4 are going to do it.
Yeah.
This fentanyl pandemic in my community here, we don't have no rehabilitation centers. Democrats have told us for so many years what they promised us and what they was going to do. Year after year, election after election, we hear the same thing.
Yes.
No change.
No action. The crime here is high. Our police department is down 500 police officers.
The other day I had a break-in at my restaurant. I called the police. They told me it was going to take 2 to 3 hours to come out. No, we need more police in the community.
And it is a lie that Hispanic and blacks don't want police officers. I'm from Dominican Republic, I'm an immigrant, I'm a black woman, Hispanic, in all the 9 yards, and we want police officers. When they label saying that Hispanic and black don't want police officers, that's creating division. That is a lie. Things are going on. That is the most important thing.
Get us in there. We'll see you soon. So great to see you. Yeah, of course. Why pause my successful business career? Because I saw what Joe Biden and Mark Kelly were doing to this country, right? I am a father of 3 young boys. They're 8, 6, and 2. I've worked hard. I've succeeded. In some relative sense, my boys will be fine, right? I've been, blessed. But on an absolute sense, like, what kind of country are these boys on track to grow up in, right? I want everybody's kids and grandkids to actually live in a country that works and an America that we still recognize. Well, Biden, Mark Kelly, they're taking that away from us.
What are your main priorities going to be day 1 in the Senate?
Stop inflation and secure the border.
Okay, so when you say stop inflation, what would be the steps to do that? What
Well,
policies?
just by winning, right? Just by getting the House and the Senate back, we can immediately put the brakes on Biden's inflation, right? Again, they threw open our southern border. They welcome 300,000 illegal immigrants every month. It's not just the people, the fentanyl. We're losing 100,000 people, mostly young Americans, every year to fentanyl. And those numbers are just going way up. Mark Kelly, he's not doing a damn thing to stop it. It makes me sick. It's killing our kids. So as soon as we secure that border and stop inflation, we have to meaningfully restrain big tech. I understand big tech better than any other candidate, actually better than any sitting senator right now. Call me old-fashioned. I think the American people should determine who the president's going to be, not Google, not Facebook, not multi-billion-dollar multinational corporations.
Kari Lake was a local anchor in Arizona for decades. She resigned in 2021 with a viral video denouncing what she described as corruption in the news media. An endorsement from Donald Trump in September of 2021 propelled her to victory in the GOP primary. Since then, she's become the target of the media machine she was once part of.
Arizona, it is time for Governor Kari Lake.
Hello, Arizona. I can't tell you how good that makes me feel. I know we've all been working hard. 522 days, I swear I'm not counting, on the campaign trail. 522 days across this gorgeous state, meeting with the most amazing people that I could ever dream of working for.
It's been such a blessing from God. I can't even describe it any other way, to be face to face with people. And they know me. I feel that I know them as well. I've been in their homes for 27 years as a fair and honest journalist and news anchor, and now it's been wonderful to reconnect with the people face to face and talk about the issues that are affecting their lives.
I want to tell you what I want to do for Arizona, and I think after 522 days, you know, we are going to secure that border starting on day 1 in January. We're going to take back the material down on the border that we paid for, and we're going to finish President Trump's wall. Who's for that?
We have a border that's wide open, fentanyl pouring in, killing 100,000 young people, and next year probably more. Elections that are corrupt and have issues have serious consequences, and we can't just look the other way and act like that didn't happen.
You've got to go in there, you've got to mark Republican, write down that ticket, and then go out and wait for the election results to come in. And it might take 10 days because we're still Arizona, but I vow to you, when I take office, we will reform our elections and restore honest, transparent elections in Arizona.
We know there were major problems. We had a forensic audit. The media doesn't want to cover that audit. But when I go out to events and I ask people, do you want reforms to your elections, so that you know on election night the results, the crowd goes crazy. People want election reform that leads to transparent, fair, and honest elections. And we're going to bring that.
Everything is on the line Tuesday. I cannot say that enough. What happens in Arizona is either going to save this country or we're going to go into ruins. We have to get out and vote like our lives depend on it. Get up early, bring some food, bring some water, bring a like-minded friend, and don't get out of line until you cast your vote. Who's ready to do that?
As dark as it seems right now, I believe that with our policies and the people behind us, our greatest and best days are ahead. I think America's watching us because they have felt very despondent the last couple of years. They've been, every time they speak out and try to point out what's going wrong or an issue, they get canceled online. Then you have a candidate like me standing up and saying, you don't have to be quiet. Once you walk through fear and got to the other side, you're like, I'm just not afraid of anything. There's a definite, palpable something happening in Arizona, and I think it's spreading across the country. And if I'm just a small part of it, I'm thrilled about that.
All right. I've now said it 3 times, Georgia. I'm still jealous that you got to do that. Also, it's a pretty cool leather jacket.
Thank you.
I know there's like a big biker community out in Arizona. Were you trying to appeal to them? Is that what you were doing? You can be honest. But it did seem very interesting. One thing that we've noticed in the Arizona race, there have been kind of these ebbs and flows, but early on, Kari Lake was not the favorite for this race. What do you view as some of the early turning points in that race?
So the major turning point was September of 2021 when she was endorsed by former President Trump. That definitely shot her to the top of the pack in the GOP primary. But since that time, she was so maligned by the media because she came out swinging, calling them totally corrupt. And just negative headline after negative headline really, I think, made people hesitant to support Kari Lake. But I think the turning point, maybe, getting her a little bit, edging out Katie Hobbs, was this summer when she went on the offensive with those, when the media came after her. So, for example, the media went after her hard for being an election denier, and
in their words,
in their words, and instead of kind of waffling about maybe some statements she'd made in the past, Kari Lake came out swinging and essentially called them election deniers. She had a whole prepared list of statements. I mean, she had a printed out list prepared for that question, statements that were made by Hillary Clinton, by Stacey Abrams, and she basically went down the list of election denial, of all stripes, of all political persuasions. And she basically said, why does it only count as election denial when it's a Republican saying it? People in Arizona want free and fair elections that have integrity and that are transparent. What's so crazy about that? So she didn't shrink away from it. She went toe to toe with them. And that's a pattern that we've seen time and time again when she's been brought on to these cable news shows and she's been asked combative questions.
Yeah, and what about the role of debates? Obviously, debate moments, they can shift an entire election. We saw how important it was up in Pennsylvania, the New York governor's race between Zeldin and Hochul. There was a big debate moment there. We don't have any big debate moments in Arizona because there was no debate.
Because Katie Hobbs, that's Carrie Lake's opponent, the state, Secretary of State, she has actually refused to debate Carrie Lake. So she has come out and given every excuse under the sun. Most commonly, she says, I don't want to legitimize Carrie Lake as a candidate, so that's why I refuse to debate her. But we've heard different excuses. And Carrie Lake has made several statements, but one of her most powerful statements she made to the voters is she made a video directed directly at Katie Hobbs, and she said, Katie, debate me. You can pick the questions, you can pick the moderator, you can pick the date, you can pick the venue. I will take any terms, but come out and debate me. And I think after that point, it became very hard for Katie Hobbs to really seem like a formidable opponent compared to her. The confidence that Carrie Lake has is so hard to compete with.
Yeah, and one interesting element that came out of that was the fact that there was a local news outlet that was supposed to have a debate between the two. Katie Hobbs didn't show up, Carrie Lake did. They gave Carrie Lake the full hour on local public broadcasting. She spoke next to an empty podium that was supposed to be there for Hobbs. A powerful visual indeed. But we've got a new guest joining us, and Georgia, take it away.
Sure. So another important race that no one thought was going to be this important is actually the New York governor's race. So joining us to discuss is New York Post columnist and I think lifelong New Yorker, David, you can correct us, David Marcus. David, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Not quite lifelong, last 20 years though.
All right, well that counts. I think that counts.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in New York, which again, we mentioned surprisingly has become actually a close gubernatorial race. How did the Republican Lee Zeldin gain so much ground in the state?
You know, I've been thinking about that all day because there's not actually that much to do on Election Day. You kind of just have to, sit around and think about what happened. And I asked myself that question and I thought, is it crime? Yeah, it's crime. Is it that the subways don't work? Yes. Is it, that the schools seem broken? Yes. Is it? And I realized it's everything, right? I mean, New York just feels broken. It doesn't feel like it's recovered. And one issue that we haven't talked about much in the midterms at all are the COVID lockdowns. They don't show up in polls. We don't see them in numbers. But when you look at this New York race and you look at the Michigan race, where Gretchen Whitmer, who also locked down very hard, was also supposed to have a very easy victory. And that's a very close race, right? Just like we have in New York. And then you look at Florida and Georgia, where Ron DeSantis and Brian Kemp are sailing to victory. Even though those were squeakers 4 years ago, I don't think it's that people are viscerally still angry about the lockdown. Some are, but the results are better. If you woke up in Florida or Georgia living there this morning, the economy's pretty good. Your kids didn't lose that much learning. People are moving there. They're not fleeing like they're following Moses. And if you woke up in New York and Michigan, the exact opposite is true. So I think the lockdowns are playing out politically right now in ways that aren't obvious, but that are right there.
Now, tell us about Lee Zeldin as a candidate. So sometimes in the Northeast, you'll see moderate Republicans get traction. Is that how you would describe Lee Zeldin? Or would you say Lee Zeldin is more of like a MAGA Republican?
I would say that he's moderate. I mean, I don't know exactly what MAGA Republican would mean in this context. The whole New York contingent, really, including Congresswoman Malliotakis, from the only Republican who represents New York City, who looks to be like she'll have success tonight. They have good relationships with Trump, right? They don't talk about the 2020 election. They don't talk about a lot of the sort of big MAGA stuff. But those relationships are strong and solid. So you're right. The Northeast Republican is a different breed of cat, and Zeldin is that. He's not ideological. He's much more sort of transactional.
Obviously, kind of the shadow hanging over this race is former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who left, disgraced governor, I think it would be the right word to use. What kind of role has he played in the race, if any?
Oh, I think he'll be thrilled if Lee Zeldin beats Kathy Hochul. I mean, he's played no role in the race. I don't think that he wants the Democrats to succeed without him in this context. And it's interesting because there has been some polling that indicates that Cuomo would be doing better than Hochul right now. And also, Cuomo really did run the Democratic Party machine in New York State in a way that Hochul doesn't. So if Hochul's going to pull this out, she's going to do it. She's going to do it with that machine getting the vote out. It's not clear that she has the same kind of power and control over that Andrew Cuomo did.
Has she tried to run away from Cuomo, or has she just tried to not mention him? Is his name, I guess, is she worried about being too closely associated with him in the state?
I mean, until a week ago, she was running away from saying anything. I mean, she didn't run a campaign, right? She was up 25 points like 3 months ago, and the assumption was, well, it's 7-1 Democrat to Republican in New York City. There's no way she loses. She really tried the Joe Biden from the basement thing. Looked like it was working, and then about 2 weeks ago, somehow Zeldin convinced New Yorkers that he had a shot, and the polls started moving rather dramatically.
Well, she also had a few pretty notable blunders just in the past couple of weeks. I think specifically she said something to the effect of the crime wave is not a real thing.
Why does it matter so much?
Why does it matter so much to you about crime?
Yeah. What kind of impact did those moments have on the election?
Oh, I mean, look, I mean, that was a Zeldin ad the next day, right? She was really trying to thread a difficult needle because she was trying to say, on the one hand, look, I know you see all the viral videos, but this is really being exaggerated. It's not that bad. And simultaneously trying to say, also, I'll fix it. Those two arguments don't make sense together. And clearly, like, one was for one group of people and another was for another group of people. But it's really hard to run a campaign, with such a, basically contradictory message.
What sort of effect has crime had? I know we keep coming back to crime because it has in many ways been the defining issue of this race. Lee Zeldin had it touch his family personally. There was the shooting outside of his home when his two 16-year-old daughters were at the residence. He was attacked on stage by a man. And then you mentioned all the crime we see in New York City and all these videos. What sort of impact has that had on New York City voters themselves? Obviously, they make up a huge portion of the New York State electorate. Is that the number one issue for New York City voters themselves?
I think it is, and I think it's something that's hard to capture in just the pure crime statistics, right? And again, I think you can take some of this back to the lockdowns. For example, right, if you're in Midtown Manhattan and you went to a concert or a show or something, it's 10:30 at night, and you're walking down the street and some like weird person makes eye contact with you, that's a much different experience if there's 40 or 50 people on the street than if there's 4 or 5 people on the street. So that basic sense of safety that people have in a bustling city like New York just isn't there right now. And my friends, especially my friends who are women, will tell me like they don't want to take the subway home at 10 o'clock at night. I mean, that was unthinkable 5 years ago. Nobody, it wouldn't have even crossed anybody's mind. So yeah, I mean, New Yorkers have a spidey sense and it goes off way too much.
There was another race that we've been keeping an eye on, a House race there with the Democrat Maloney. What's going on there? I mean, we got a guy who's the chair of the DCCC that is now in danger. Is that a race that you actually think could go for Republicans?
I mean, sure it could. And these races feed into each other, right? I mean, to the extent that there's excitement on the congressional side, that's going to help Zeldin. Zeldin's going to have coattails for these congressional candidates. One race that I think I mentioned this race, one race that I'll be watching early on is New York 11, which is Malliotakis versus Max Rose. Malliotakis beat then incumbent Rose by about 6 points back in 2020. If that number looks more like 8 to 10, that's going to bode really well for Zeldin. If it looks more like 3 to 5, that's going to be good news for Hochul.
All right. Well, David, we appreciate all of your insight on this. You've been the go-to man when it comes to all things New York politics. We appreciate your insight on Morning Wire as well. We're going to continue to hear from you as well. But thanks so much, David Marcus.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, Georgia, you know that we've been talking a lot about these Senate races. But it's important to not forget about the governor's races. You and I have talked already plenty about Kari Lake in Arizona and Tudor Dixon in Michigan, but there are a lot of other governor's races around the country, 36 in total up for grabs right now. And I think it's important to remember for a lot of people at home, who your governor is ends up impacting you a lot more than some of your federal elected officials, many times even more than your senator or your president. And so I think it's important to look at some of these governor's races. We're going to go through a couple of the battleground races right now, kind of get a feel for some of the polling. Do you mind if I nerd out again?
Yeah,
I got to
please do.
nerd out in hour one. Professor Cabot back in session. It's great to have all of you in my classroom. This is weird. I don't want to be a professor. I take back that again. We're going to go to Georgia first. The latest polling, the final polling from Insider Advantage, has Brian Kemp, the Republican, up 50 to 45. Stacey Abrams, she's someone that has complete name recognition in the state of Georgia. She's been making huge efforts to try and get voters mobilized. One thing Republicans were hitting her on, pointing out the fact that she was saying that Georgia's election integrity laws and voter ID laws were sort of Jim Crow 2.0 in the state, and saying that it was going to suppress the vote in Georgia. We've now seen record voting in the state of Georgia early. It's been shattering records in Georgia. And so a lot of Republicans saying that was just kind of rhetoric you were using to scare people, because now we see voting totals soaring in Georgia. We're going to head out now to Arizona, that race we've been talking about, and really everyone in the country has been talking about, with Kari Lake. Latest polling, the final polling from Trafalgar, has Kari Lake up 51 to 47. One of the big turning points of this election was that refusal to debate from Katie Hobbs. Since then, we've seen polls continue to go in Lake's favor. And a lot of Republicans who are wanting control of the Senate are very grateful for Kari Lake, because she is more popular in the state than the Republican Blake Masters running for Senate. Masters has run, in many ways, a smart campaign. He's gaining ground. But there's a certain coattail effect that Republicans are hoping happens there. Then to Michigan, the final polling from our partners at Trafalgar has Tudor Dixon with a 1-point lead, but still within the margin of error. She's up 49-48 over Gretchen Whitmer. Another place where crime has been a huge issue, and obviously the economy. And finally, in Oregon, this is a race that a lot of people aren't really talking about as a governor's race, but we could have a Republican governor in Oregon by the end of tonight. And that's because there are 3 candidates on the ballot. Betsy Johnson, the independent. Earlier in the campaign, she was polling around 20 to 25%. The latest polling from Data for Progress, that is a Democrat-leaning poll, has Betsy Johnson only at 7%, meaning that Tina Kotek, the Democrat nominee, has been able to get up to 48%, but the Republican, Christine Drazen, is at 44%. Keep in mind, again, if Betsy Johnson, the independent, who has a long history in the state as a Democrat elected official, if she's able to get 10 to 15% of the vote, there's a very good chance that Republicans could win that race, only getting around 45% of the vote. But keep an eye on Oregon, another state very much like Washington, like California, where crime and homelessness have really decimated Democrat odds and hurt them in so many ways. And one little nugget to add on Oregon, Phil Knight, the co-founder of Nike, has poured in over $3 million to the Republican candidate. That's right, the co-founder of Nike has given $3 million to Christine Drazen. He does not want any more Democrat leadership. He's had Kate Brown, the governor there of Oregon, for the last few years. He's very openly feuded with her. He wants a Republican there. So we could have Oregon turn red when it comes to the governor's office.
I think it's been decades, right, since they've
had... It's been 40 years, the longest drought in the entire country. You're absolutely right on that. So we're going to get now to one more clip from voters on the street. We're going to get to hear from them on the issue of crime. We talked about the impact that's had on a lot of these races. What say we hear from the voters on that?
Yeah, let's hear from them.
We're scared every day.
I'm very fortunate enough that I live in a pretty rural environment that we don't necessarily have as big of a crime factor. But yeah, in larger municipalities, it's a shame that we have to deal with that right now.
Investing in our police. It was defund the police, and now all of a sudden they realized that didn't work. So now they want more money back, which they never should have taken away to begin with.
Crime in the U.S. as a whole has to be controlled and stopped.
Support of our police stations, support of our police men and women that protect us.
I mean, we're lucky, but when we go to something like Nashville, when we have our pilot telling us, be careful out there on the streets. I mean, I've never, ever had anybody ever tell me that in all my days of travel. And it made us a little nervous, honestly. And I felt a little more nervous about it last night, to be honest with you, out here on the street. I've never felt that way.
I am not as prone on gun control but I guess to a degree. You know, the semi-automatic firearms, yeah, there probably needs to be some regulations on that. But again, in my, you know, we don't want to give an inch and have them take a mile, because I am a very proud gun owner.
When you have people that think that they're above the police, women and men, you get chaos.
People are going in, looting businesses. They're taken away from us as a whole. I'm a business owner. I can't have that kind of stuff going on.
Our deputies department, they work overtime. We feel very safe there, but it just seems to be getting worse all the time.
Now, while polls give us somewhat of a view into how voters may be feeling, for many, it really comes down to the issues. And we caught up with several people from all around the country to see which issues are their deciding factors. For many people, crime was at the top of the list.
That is what we heard consistently from voters. It was crime, it was the economy. But it is fun just to get to hear from people. You can look at all the polls you want, but when you go out on the street and actually talk to people from all over the country, people come to Nashville. We were out in different cities as well. It's very interesting to get to see what's driving a lot of these races. So before we let everyone go and head to the Daily Wire Plus election show coverage for the rest of the evening, I want to give everyone one final look at the closing polls for the battleground Senate races. We're going to start in Georgia, the race everyone's been talking about between Herschel Walker and Democrat incumbent Raphael Warnock. The final polling from Insider Advantage has Walker with a 2-point lead, still within the margin of error. It's 49-47. Keep an eye on that race. The big thing to keep in mind now for Georgia, who gets to 50%? If neither candidate gets to 50%, we go to a December 6th runoff. And if the balance of the Senate, it depends on that runoff, you're going to see record spending on that runoff 4 weeks from now. So keep an eye there. Who gets 50%? Most candidates right now in all the polling are flirting with 50, but in a lot of them, they've only been at 48, 49. We'll have to see who has a higher ceiling. Republicans are hoping that Brian Kemp's popularity starts to drive Herschel Walker at the polls. Then out to Arizona, the final polling in the Senate there has Republican Blake Masters with a 48-47 lead over Democrat incumbent Mark Kelly. That's the final poll from Trafalgar, our partners there, who really showed that this race was going to be close before anyone else. They put out a poll with Blake Masters within 3 points, I believe it was. Everyone else had it as a 6 to 8 point lead. And yes, if you're wondering, this is me just flexing on the fact that our pollsters at Trafalgar had this race close before anyone else did. And it is now a true toss-up. Keep an eye on Blake Masters there. In Nevada, a race that hasn't been getting as much attention, but Republicans view it as the best chance for a pickup. You've got Democrat incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto at 45%, Adam Laxalt, the Republican challenger, at 50%. That's in the latest Trafalgar polling. Nevada, it's an interesting race right now because this is the first race that we've had since long-term Democrat Senator Harry Reid passed away earlier last year. He had a powerful Democrat machine, and once he passed away, there was a big question over who would fill the power vacuum. There's a lot more infighting that we've seen among Democrats in the state. Nevada also was a state that was hit incredibly hard by COVID lockdowns, and people are really rebelling against Democrat leadership there, as you can see.
Well, there's also the Latino vote in Nevada that's maybe a sleeper issue that we'll see how that plays out. I mean, it could be huge.
Especially with their proximity to the border. We've seen the impact that has had, especially among Latino voters in the South and Southwest. And then to Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, he's down 46-48 against Republican challenger Dr. Oz in the final Insider Advantage polling. We've talked a lot about that. The fellows are going to be talking a lot more about that later on. And then finally to Ohio Senate, where J.D. Vance, the Republican challenger, is up 10 points, 54-44 over Democrat Tim Ryan. That's according to our sources, or to our poll at Trafalgar. And so you kind of get a feel right